Forced to marry the plain bride for a deal until the veil fell and stunned the millionaire. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support truly means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Today's story is titled, Forced to Marry the Plain Bride for a Deal Until the Veil Fell and Stunned the Millionaire. Now, let us return to our main character. It was close to midnight when the boardroom lights still burned over the glass tower of Voss Industries. The rain streaked down the windows like liquid silver, and every clap of thunder echoed through the empty floor. Adrian Voss, 35, one of the youngest self-made millionaires in New York, sat alone at the head of the long mahogany table. A single contract lay open before him, its title in bold black ink, Marital Stability Clause. His jaw tightened as he read the line again. The CEO must present a legally recognized spouse before the merger signing. His father's legacy, the company he built from scratch, was about to slip from his hands unless Adrian agreed to a marriage he did not believe in. The board wanted a stable public image, and the investors demanded a family man. Marry for the deal, his lawyer had said earlier that evening, voice cold through the speakerphone. It is not about love, Adrian. It is about leverage. He closed his eyes for a moment, running a hand through his dark hair. Love was something he had buried years ago, under layers of work, ambition, and trust broken by people who only saw the dollar signs attached to his name. A sharp knock cut through the thunder. The door opened, and his assistant stepped in, holding a thin folder. Sir, this is the candidate they proposed. Her name is Elise Hart, Human Resources Clerk, 27. Quiet, responsible, no scandals, and… The assistant hesitated. Not exactly camera material. But she signed the non-disclosure agreement. Adrian looked up. A clerk? His tone was dry. They want me to marry an employee? The assistant swallowed. It is the safest option, sir. No ties to competitors. And she agreed to keep the marriage strictly professional. Adrian leaned back in his chair, the city lights reflecting in his cold gray eyes. Professional, he repeated softly. That is exactly what I need. He reached for his pen and signed the first page of the arrangement. His signature cut across the paper like a blade. At that same hour, across town, Elise Hart stood outside her small apartment building, clutching a letter in her trembling hands. The rent was overdue, and the hospital had just called her foster mother's heart medication needed immediate payment. She had spent the last 2 years trying to climb her way out of debt, taking extra shifts and skipping meals. But tonight, everything had come crashing down. Her phone buzzed. Miss Hart, a woman's voice said on the other end, you have been selected for a confidential corporate arrangement. The compensation will cover your debt entirely. The terms require a temporary marriage for image purposes. Do you accept? Elise pressed her hand to her chest, feeling her heartbeat pounding beneath the fabric of her worn coat. Marriage? She whispered. Yes, the woman said calmly. You would be Mrs. Adrian Voss for appearance only. 3 months. No intimacy, no media disclosure. After the contract ends, you will receive full payment. Rain began to fall again, soft at first, then heavy, washing over the cracked pavement. Elise looked up at the gray sky, tears mixing with the rain. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she answered, Yes, I accept. The next morning, the elevator doors opened to the top floor of Voss Industries. Elise stepped out in a borrowed beige dress, her hair pulled into a simple knot. The city skyline stretched behind the glass walls like a painted storm. Adrian stood waiting, hands in his pockets, the air around him sharp and cold. Their eyes met for the first time. He studied her quietly, expecting arrogance, desperation, or greed. Instead, he found calmness, a kind of quiet dignity that unsettled him more than he cared to admit. So, he said finally, his voice low, you understand what this is? Elise nodded. A contract, nothing more. Adrian's mouth curved into a faint, ironic smile. Good, then sign it. She took the pen, her hand shaking slightly, and wrote her name beneath his. The sound of the pen scratching the paper filled the silent room. When it was done, Adrian closed the folder and said, Congratulations, Mrs. Voss. You just saved $1 billion deal. Elise met his gaze for a brief second, then looked away. I did not do it for you, Mr. Voss, she said softly. I did it to save someone I love. He paused, the words catching him off guard, but he said nothing. As she turned to leave, The reflection of her face appeared faintly in the glass wall, gentle, simple, unadorned. And for a fleeting moment, Adrian Voss, the man who had never once doubted his own control, found himself wondering who this plain bride really was and why he suddenly could not look away. The ceremony was quiet, almost businesslike. No family, no friends, no flowers. Just 2 signatures, 2 witnesses, and the echo of rain tapping against the courthouse windows. Elise stood beside Adrian, her hands folded tightly in front of her as the judge declared them husband and wife. "Congratulations," the clerk said politely, sliding the documents forward. Adrian gave a small nod, his expression unreadable. Elise managed a faint smile, though her stomach twisted. It was done. She was Mrs. Voss, at least on paper. Outside, the gray sky hung low over Manhattan. Adrian opened the car door for her, his movements precise, impersonal. "We have to make an appearance at the press conference this afternoon," he said. "The board wants to see the ring." Elise looked down at her hand. The diamond sparkled coldly, too large for her slender fingers. "Do I need to say anything?" she asked quietly. "Just smile," Adrian replied, "and do not look nervous. They can smell fear." The words stung more than she expected. She bit the inside of her cheek, nodding without a word. Hours later, she stood under a wall of flashing lights, the sound of cameras filling the room like a storm. Adrian's arm rested around her shoulders, the perfect picture of devotion. To the crowd, they looked like a golden couple, young, successful, untouchable. Only Elise knew that every breath she took felt rehearsed. When the last question was asked and the reporters began to leave, Adrian leaned toward her and whispered, "You did well." "Thank you, Mr. Voss," she answered automatically. His gaze lingered a moment, colder than the flashbulbs around them. "In public," he said softly, "it is Adrian." That night, the mansion on the Upper East Side was silent, except for the faint hum of the city outside. Elise stood in the doorway of her assigned bedroom, staring at the walls lined with expensive art. The space was immaculate, sterile, and lonely. She had never lived in a place so beautiful, yet it felt like a museum, every object too perfect to touch. She hung her modest coat in the closet, the only thing in the room that looked out of place. When she turned, Adrian was standing at the doorframe, sleeves rolled up, a folder in his hand. "I will have my assistant arrange your schedule," he said simply. "We will attend 5 public events together. After that, the contract ends." Elise nodded, understood. He studied her for a moment, his eyes flicking to the simple silver pendant around her neck. "You are not used to this world, are you?" "No," she replied honestly, "but I learned fast." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, the first real sign of warmth she had seen from him. "We will see." He turned to leave, but paused. "Dinner is at 7. Do not be late. The staff will help you with the attire." When he was gone, Elise exhaled, feeling her shoulders loosen for the first time that day. She walked to the mirror, touching the edge of the veil that still hung from her hair. The lace shimmered faintly under the soft light. For a moment she wondered what it would feel like if this were real, if someone actually looked at her and saw more than a transaction. The next morning began her transformation. A stylist and etiquette coach arrived at dawn, armed with racks of gowns and stacks of note cards. "You must move slower," the coach instructed. "Smile with your eyes, not your teeth. Never interrupt when the men speak." Gay. Elise did her best, fumbling at first but gradually adapting. She practiced her walk down the grand staircase, balancing a book on her head while the stylist adjusted her dress. Adrian passed by once, phone pressed to his ear. He did not stop, but she caught the faintest flicker of amusement in his eyes. By the 3rd day, she could hold herself with poise, deliver polite conversation, and even return a journalist's question with measured grace. Yet beneath the polished surface, her heart remained heavy. At the first charity gala, she entered beside Adrian under a canopy of golden light. The crowd parted as they walked, the orchestra swelling softly. Elise could feel every eye on her, measuring, judging, whispering. A woman in a sequined gown leaned toward her companion and murmured, "So that is the bride? She is ordinary." Elise heard it, but she kept her head high. She turned to the woman with a polite smile and said gently, "Ordinary is a word for people who do not look closely enough." The woman blinked, caught off guard. Adrian, standing beside her, said nothing. But his hand subtly tightened around Elise's as he guided her forward. Later, when the speeches were over and the crowd began to dance, Adrian approached her by the balcony. The city lights shimmered beyond the glass like scattered stars. "You handled that well," he said quietly. She shrugged lightly. People always talk. I just choose which words to listen to. He looked at her for a long moment, as if trying to decode something he could not quite name. You surprise me, Mrs. Voss. Maybe you just have not been paying attention, she replied, her tone soft but sure. For the first time since they met, he laughed low, genuine, unexpected. It startled her. For a moment, the air between them shifted. Then the music from inside swelled again, and he straightened his cufflinks, the mask of composure sliding back into place. "Good night, Elise," he said, turning away. "Good night, Adrian," she whispered, though he was already gone. When she returned to her room, the veil from the ceremony still lay folded on the dresser. She ran her fingers across the fabric, its threads glinting in the lamplight. The world thought she was plain. Perhaps she was. But tonight, for a fleeting second, she had seen something different in his eyes, something that felt dangerously close to real. The following weeks turned into a routine of appearances, rehearsed smiles, and quiet evenings spent in separate rooms. To the world, they were the perfect couple. To themselves, they were strangers bound by paper and duty. Adrian carried himself with effortless control, while Elise learned to navigate his world of cold elegance and silent expectations. At the third charity event, held at the Voss Foundation headquarters, Elise found herself standing before a wall of reporters. Flashbulbs burst like fireworks, their questions sharp and unrelenting. "Mrs. Voss, how does it feel to be married to one of the most powerful men in the country?" a reporter asked. Elise smiled softly, her training steadying her. "It feels like learning to breathe in a different altitude," she said, her voice calm but sincere. "You stumble at first, but you find your balance." Adrian turned his head slightly, surprise flickering across his expression. Later, when they were alone in the car, he said, "You handled them better than my PR team." She looked out the window, the city lights blurring by. "Maybe because I am not trying to handle them. I am just trying to be honest." "Honesty is rare in this business," he replied quietly. "And yet you hired me to lie," she said, her tone neutral but piercing. Adrian's jaw tightened, but he did not respond. The silence between them felt heavier than before, yet not entirely uncomfortable. The next morning, Elise woke early and wandered through the garden behind the mansion. The roses were in bloom, their colors bright against the marble paths. She found an old greenhouse near the back corner, half forgotten, its glass panels dusted with age. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. The air smelled of soil and rain. Someone had once loved this place. She could feel it. Later that day, she asked the housekeeper about it. "It belonged to his mother," the woman said softly. "She used to spend hours there. After she passed, Mr. Voss locked it and never went back." That evening, Elise returned with a watering can. She started cleaning the benches, trimming the old vines, coaxing life back into the forgotten space. It became her secret corner, a quiet refuge from the noise of his world. One night, Adrian came home late from a board meeting. He passed by the garden and noticed the faint glow inside the greenhouse. Curious, he stepped closer. Through the fogged glass, he saw Elise kneeling by a row of small plants, humming softly as she worked. The sight froze him in place. There was no performance, no mask, just simple grace in the way she moved. The next morning, he found her in the kitchen pouring coffee. "You revived the greenhouse," he said. She turned, surprised. "I did not think you would notice." "I notice everything that affects my property," he said, his tone dry. But the corner of his mouth lifted slightly. "It looks better." "Thank you," she replied, smiling faintly. It just needed someone to care again. He studied her, wanting to say something more but stopping himself. Instead, he asked, "Why do you do it?" "You could stay in the comfort of this house and let the gardeners handle it." "Good knows." "Because comfort is not the same as peace," she answered simply. The words lingered with him longer than he wanted to admit. Days later, they attended a formal dinner with shareholders. The air was thick with polite competition and hidden barbs. During the meal, a guest leaned forward with a smirk. "Mrs. Voss, I must say, you are not what we expected for the CEO's wife." Adrian's knife paused mid-cut, but Elise spoke first. "That is all right," she said evenly. "Expectations often hide better surprises." The table fell silent, then erupted in polite laughter. Adrian glanced at her, something like admiration flickering in his eyes. That night, as their driver pulled up to the mansion, Adrian finally said, "You know, you keep doing that." "Doing what?" "Disarming people who underestimate you." She smiled faintly. "Maybe I just learned to stop apologizing for who I am." He looked at her for a long time, then said quietly, "That makes two of us." I quote. For the first time, the air between them felt different, softer, less staged. The walls he had built around himself began to show cracks. Later, Elise found him on the balcony, staring at the skyline. The city below shimmered with restless lights. "Why do you always look like you are waiting for a storm?" she asked gently. Adrian did not turn to face her. Because storms never ask permission before they arrive. She stepped closer, her voice low. "Maybe not, but sometimes they clear the air." He finally looked at her, and for a moment, neither spoke. The silence was not cold this time, it was charged, alive. The night breeze carried the faint scent of the roses she had revived. When she returned to her room, Elise found a small note on her dresser written in neat handwriting. "Dinner tomorrow? No media, no guests." She touched the paper, a smile forming on her lips. For the first time since the contract began, it felt like something genuine was unfolding, something not written in ink, but in small, careful moments that neither of them had planned. Dinner the next evening was different from all the others. The long dining table, usually set for 10, had only 2 places arranged at its center. The candles flickered softly against the marble walls, and the sound of rain outside made the silence between them almost intimate. Adrian was already seated when Elise entered, wearing a simple navy dress that contrasted beautifully with the white of the room. He stood, pulling out her chair with unexpected courtesy. "I hope you do not mind something quiet," he said. "I needed a break from the noise." "I do not mind at all," she answered, settling into her seat. Silence is underrated. Dinner began without pretense. No reporters, no business partners, no staged affection. Just 2 people eating in the soft glow of candlelight. For the first time, Adrian looked at her without calculation. He noticed the way she listened, the way she smiled politely even when the conversation faltered, and the faint shadow of fatigue under her eyes from the week's endless appearances. After a while, he asked, "What would you do if you were not part of this arrangement?" Elise set down her fork, thinking carefully. "I would start a small art program for children, maybe something for those who cannot afford classes. My mother believed art heals more than words." Adrian leaned back, watching her. "That is not what I expected." "What did you expect?" she asked, smiling lightly. "Another person who wanted to climb the social ladder," he said, "not someone who talks about healing." Her voice softened. "Maybe it is because I know what it feels like to be invisible. Helping others see themselves again, it feels like something worth doing." Quote. He was quiet for a moment, his expression unreadable. "My mother used to say something similar," he said at last. "She believed that real wealth is what you leave behind in people, not numbers." Elise's eyes lifted to meet his. "You still believe her?" He hesitated, then nodded. "More than I admit." The thunder rolled outside, low and distant. Adrian rose, walking toward the window. "When she died, I buried myself in work. I told myself love was just a transaction that always ends in loss. I stopped believing in promises." Elise stood slowly, moving closer. "Maybe you just stopped believing in the wrong kind of promises," she said gently. He turned to her, his usual guard slipping for a moment. "You make it sound simple." "It never is," she replied. "But simple things are often the hardest to do." For a long time they stood there, the storm reflected in the glass and in their eyes. Then Adrian reached into his pocket and took out something small, a silver key. He placed it on the table between them. "It is the key to the greenhouse," he said. "I think my mother would have liked what you did there." Elise looked at the key, her breath catching slightly. "Thank you. She would have wanted someone to bring it back to life," he added quietly. "You did that." The words carried a warmth she had never heard in his voice before. Later that night, after Adrian had gone to his study, Elise walked to the greenhouse under the light drizzle. The key fit perfectly in the lock. Inside, the scent of wet soil and new blossoms filled the air. She lit a small lantern and stood among the flowers, remembering his voice, the flicker of sincerity that had broken through his usual restraint. She placed the lantern on the bench, whispering to herself, "Maybe not everything in this house is pretend." Behind her, through the rain-smeared glass, the mansion lights glowed faintly. Somewhere in the quiet distance, Adrian stood at the balcony, watching the soft glow of the greenhouse, realizing he had begun to look forward to her presence more than he ever intended. Neither of them said it out loud, but both knew something had changed. What began as a contract was slowly becoming a confession neither dared to make yet. The following week brought the annual Voss Industries Shareholders Gala, the company's most important public event of the year. It was the kind of evening that defined reputations and decided fortunes. Adrian was calm as always, his suit pressed, his expression carved in control. Elise, however, felt her pulse quicken as the limousine pulled up in front of the glittering glass hotel. Tonight was the largest appearance since their marriage, and she was no longer sure what was real and what was still part of the contract. The entrance hall was filled with light, crystal chandeliers scattering reflections across the marble floor. Cameras flashed, and reporters whispered the couple's names. Adrian took Elise's hand, his touch steady and practiced, but the warmth behind it was no longer pretend. "Ready?" he asked quietly. "I think so," she said, exhaling slowly. They stepped into the grand ballroom, where the orchestra played and the hum of conversation rose around them. The crowd parted slightly, turning to look at the couple who had become the face of the Voss empire. Elise moved gracefully beside him, her gown a soft shade of ivory that shimmered under the light. For the first part of the evening, everything went according to plan. They greeted investors, exchanged polite smiles, and posed for photographs. Adrian's father's oldest associate, Mr. Lennox, approached them, holding a glass of champagne. "Adrian," he said with a laugh that did not reach his eyes, "you have outdone yourself. I expected another model or heiress, not someone so unassuming." Elise felt the words like a sting, but forced a calm smile. "Thank you, Mr. Lennox. I suppose being unexpected has its advantages." Lennox chuckled, but Adrian's gaze hardened. "My wife is not a trophy, Lennox," he said evenly. "She does not need to outshine anyone to be worth standing beside me." The table around them fell silent. Lennox muttered an apology and quickly turned away. Elise looked at Adrian, startled by his sudden defense. He did not look back at her, but the faint tension in his jaw betrayed how much the comment had bothered him. When they sat later for dinner, Adrian leaned slightly toward her and said quietly, "You handled that with more grace than I did." She smiled gently. "Maybe because I am used to being underestimated." He gave a small nod. "Not anymore." Quote. Halfway through the evening, Adrian was called to speak. As he walked to the podium, Elise watched him from their table. His voice carried through the hall, calm and confident, the sound of a man completely in control. Yet when his eyes briefly met hers across the crowd, there was something softer there, something that did not belong to the performance. As applause filled the room, Elise excused herself to the terrace for a moment of quiet. The city lights shimmered beyond the glass walls, the cool night air brushing against her face. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to see Adrian standing there, holding 2 glasses of champagne. "You disappeared," he said. "The crowd was starting to miss you." She laughed softly. "I needed a break from all the perfect smiles." He handed her a glass. "I know the feeling." For a moment they stood side by side, the sound of the party muffled behind the doors. The city stretched beneath them like a constellation. "Do you ever wonder," she asked quietly, "what will happen when the contract ends?" Adrian hesitated, his expression unreadable. "I try not to think about it." "But you do," she said. He looked down at his glass. "More than I should." A gust of wind swept through, catching a loose strand of her hair. Without thinking, he reached out, tucking it gently behind her ear. His hand lingered for a second too long before he pulled it back. "I am sorry," he murmured. "You do not have to apologize," she replied softly. "It is just complicated." He gave a small, humorless smile. Everything worth feeling usually is. They stood there, close enough to feel each other's breath, but neither moved. Inside, the orchestra began another song, slow and aching. Elise looked through the glass doors at the reflection of them standing together, 2 people bound by a lie that was starting to feel like the truth. When they finally returned to the ballroom, whispers followed them, but neither cared. For the first time, Adrian's hand found hers without hesitation, and she did not pull away. Somewhere between the chandeliers and the storm of cameras, the line between contract and connection quietly disappeared. Neither of them said it, but both knew it was no longer just a performance. It was the beginning of something neither had planned for, and neither could stop. That night, after the gala, the mansion felt quieter than usual. The faint sound of rain echoed against the tall windows, and the air still carried traces of champagne and perfume. Elise stood by her bedroom mirror, removing her earrings slowly. Her reflection looked different now, tired, but softer, calmer. Somewhere between the role she was paid to play, she had found something real. A knock came at the door. Before she could answer, Adrian's voice sounded from the hallway. "Elise, may I come in?" She hesitated only a moment before opening the door. He stood there, jacket off, his shirt collar slightly undone. For once, he did not look like the unreachable CEO. He looked human. "I wanted to thank you," he said quietly. "For tonight. For everything." She smiled faintly. "You defended me in front of everyone. I should be the one thanking you." Adrian stepped inside, his expression unreadable. You did not need defending, you just needed to be seen, and I should have done that sooner. The honesty in his tone startled her. For a moment neither spoke. The rain outside grew heavier, tapping like a rhythm against the glass. He took a step closer, his voice low. You asked me once if I still believed in my mother's words. I think I finally do. What changed? She asked. You, he said simply. The words hung in the air, fragile and unguarded. Elise felt her heart pound in her chest, and she looked away, unsure what to do with the warmth that rose inside her. Adrian, the contract. I know, he interrupted gently. It is not supposed to mean anything, but it does. He moved to the window, watching the rain fall in streaks of silver. When this started, I thought I was buying time, not learning how to feel again. He turned toward her, his eyes searching hers. I do not want to pretend anymore. Elise's voice trembled slightly. You are not pretending? No, he said. Not with you. She took a slow breath, the storm outside matching the one inside her chest. I do not know what this is, Adrian, but I know it feels honest. He smiled faintly. For once, honesty does not scare me. They stood there in the quiet, the distance between them shrinking without either of them moving. The sound of thunder rolled faintly through the city. Adrian reached out, brushing a drop of rain that had fallen from her hair. You should rest, he said softly. Tomorrow will be difficult. Why? She asked. He hesitated, then said, The press will publish something in the morning. Someone leaked details about the contract. It might get ugly. Elise's breath caught. Who would do that? I do not know, he replied grimly, but I will handle it. She nodded, trying to hide the fear in her eyes. As he turned to leave, she said, Adrian. He paused. Whatever happens tomorrow, she said quietly, do not forget that not everything between us was written on paper. He met her gaze for a long moment, then gave a slow nod. I will not. When the door closed behind him, Elise sank onto the edge of her bed, listening to the storm rage outside. The warmth of his words still lingered, but beneath it was a growing dread. Somewhere in the shadows of their perfect lie, someone was waiting to tear everything apart. The morning came heavy with gray clouds and the chill of betrayal. Elise awoke to the sound of her phone buzzing on the nightstand. Dozens of messages, missed calls, and headlines filled the screen. Her hands trembled as she opened one of the news articles. In bold letters it read, CEO Adrian Voss's marriage revealed to be a contract arrangement. The article included details that no one outside the company should have known: the terms, the duration, even the payment promised to her. Photos from the gala accompanied the story, painting her as a gold digger and him as a manipulator. Elise's chest tightened. She threw on a coat and hurried down the hall. When she reached Adrian's office, the door was already open. He stood behind his desk, the newspaper spread out before him, his expression cold and unreadable. So, it is true, she said quietly. He looked up, his voice sharp. You tell me, who else could have leaked this, Elise? The contract was in your possession, too. Quote. Her breath caught. You think I did this? I do not know what to think, he said, his tone low but hard. My company's stock is falling, my board is demanding answers, and your signature is all over the agreement. Tears stung her eyes. I would never humiliate you like this. Everything I did with integrity. Adrian turned away, running a hand through his hair. Integrity does not stop a scandal, it only softens the ruin. The words sliced through her. For a moment, she stood frozen, then said quietly, I thought you knew me better than that. He looked at her finally, but his voice stayed cold. I thought I did too. She stepped back, shaking her head. You said you did not want to pretend anymore, Adrian, but I think that is all you ever knew how to do. He did not answer. The silence between them was sharper than any accusation. Elise turned and walked away, her heels echoing down the marble hallway. Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall again. She stood on the front steps, looking back at the house that had never really felt like home. Then she pulled the ring from her finger and set it on the stone railing. Goodbye, Mr. Voss, she whispered. As she disappeared into the rain, Adrian watched from the window above, the truth slowly sinking in that he had just driven away the only person who had ever looked at him without seeing a fortune. The following days unfolded, like a storm that refused to end. News stations replayed the scandal nonstop, and social media tore the story apart. Adrian's face filled every screen once admired as the untouchable CEO, now branded as a fraud hiding behind a fake marriage. The company's investors demanded an emergency meeting, and the board prepared a vote that could remove him from his position. Adrian barely slept. His office was filled with silence and the dim glow of computer screens showing plummeting numbers. Every time he tried to focus, her voice echoed in his mind. You said you did not want to pretend anymore. He had accused her without proof, and now everything that mattered was slipping away. It was late afternoon when his assistant entered, holding a tablet. Sir, you need to see this. On the screen was a live press conference. Elise stood at the podium, calm and composed despite the flashing cameras. Behind her was the logo of the Voss Foundation, not the company itself. There has been much speculation about my marriage to Mr. Adrian Voss, she began. Yes, it started as a contract. But I stayed because I saw the man behind the title. He believed in his company, in his people, and whether he admits it or not in kindness. Her words struck him like a physical blow. I did not sell my silence, she continued. I will not sell my truth either. Adrian Voss is not the man these headlines describe. And if you are wondering, no, I was not paid to say this. In fact, I have returned every cent from the arrangement to his foundation. I do not want his money. I only want the truth to stand where the lies have been built. The crowd erupted with questions, but Elise stepped away from the microphone, refusing to answer more. In his office, Adrian rose from his chair, heart pounding. Without hesitation, he called his driver. Find her, he said. Now. An hour later, he found her standing by the old greenhouse in the garden of the mansion. She turned as he approached, her eyes wary but calm. You did not have to do that, he said softly. Yes, I did, she replied. Someone had to tell the truth. I was supposed to protect you, he said. Instead, I hurt you. Elise shook her head. You did not hurt me, Adrian. You disappointed me. That is worse. Close. He stepped closer, his voice trembling for the first time. Then let me fix it. The silence that followed carried the weight of everything unsaid of accusations, forgiveness, and something far deeper waiting to be spoken. Adrian stood before Elise, the storm finally quiet around them. The greenhouse lights flickered softly, casting golden reflections over the glass walls. He took a breath, his voice low but steady. I tore the contract apart, he said, holding a folded paper in his hand. It does not bind us anymore. It never should have. Elise looked at him, unsure whether to believe the man who once doubted her. Why show me this now? Because I do not want a deal, he said. I want a choice. I choose you without conditions, without cameras, without terms. For a moment she said nothing. The faint scent of blooming roses filled the air. You hurt me, she whispered. I know, he answered. And I will spend every day proving I learned what love actually means. Cloak. He reached into his pocket and placed something on the table between them. It was the silver key to the greenhouse, the same one he had once given her as a gesture of gratitude. But now, tied to it, was a simple gold ring. This is not a payment, he said. It is a promise. Tears welled in her eyes, soft and silent. She took the key and the ring, her hands trembling slightly. I never wanted your fortune, Adrian. I only wanted your truth. He smiled gently. Then take it. It has always been yours. A year later, the greenhouse stood restored, filled with color and light. A small plaque by the entrance read, Heart Foundation for Community, art founded by Adrian and Elise Voss. Under the morning sun, Adrian turned to her and said quietly, No contracts, no lies, just us. Elise smiled, taking his hand. Just us. And this time, it was real.